Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Well, it's just 2 days until Thanksgiving, and what this means is that this is the time when progressives, prepare to remind us that the Puritan pilgrims who first arrived there at Plymouth Rock, they were illegal immigrants who refused to recognize the established borders of the indigenous Americans. For example, it was this past Sunday when an actor named John Leguizamo, he took to Twitter and he declared, "Happy Indigenous Survivors Day." Happy Indigenous Survivors Day. And in order to clarify the point that he was making, well, this angry actor who's, suffered so much here in America, he then went on to add, F Thanksgiving. That's right. He wants you to F Thanksgiving. And listen, this Colombian American actor, whose net worth is more than $25 million, this actor who's happily enjoying the fruits of European colonialism, well, he wants us to also shame those first pilgrims who initially came to North America with a desire to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, it strikes me as odd that the same people who are quick to insist that our Thanksgiving holiday is nothing but a celebration of genocide, well, these are the same people who were upset with Governor Ron DeSantis when, this governor from Florida sent a group of illegal immigrants to Martha's Vineyard. You might not know this, but Martha's Vineyard was once inhabited by the same indigenous people who initially embraced the pilgrims who arrived there at Plymouth Rock back in 1620. And while it's true that these Wampanoag people were happy to help the pilgrims to create their colony, well, it's also true that the current residents of Martha's Vineyard, they refused to embrace the illegal immigrants who were recently sent to this same area. And this, of course, includes the Obamas, the Clintons, Oprah Winfrey, David Letterman, Spike Lee, Bill Murray, and the list goes on and on. There's a long list of progressive politicians and liberal entertainers who are currently dwelling there on the land that once belonged to the Wampanoag people. And while it's true that the federal government gave these people back nearly, 500 acres of the tribal lands, they gave them this small sliver of Martha's Vineyard back in 1998. And yet it's also true that the current residents who are now occupying this land are unwilling to embrace, new immigrants who were sent to the island last September. Now, please don't misunderstand my point, because I don't personally believe that the people living there in Martha's Vineyard are obligated to give up the property that they purchased so that, illegal immigrants can come and just have a place to call their own on property they didn't purchase. I personally am just struggling with the hypocrisy of those who demonize the pilgrims every single year just before Thanksgiving while simultaneously owning property that once belonged to indigenous people. It's nothing but hypocrisy. If you really believe this, give your property back. Give your property back to indigenous people and let them occupy that territory. But it's hypocrisy to enjoy the fruits of colonialism while simultaneously shaming those who want to commemorate the peaceful relationship that the English pilgrims had with the Wampanoag people. And listen, the peaceful relationship that the English pilgrims had with the Wampanoag people there in the 17th century, this peace was actually enjoyed by both parties. And despite the fact that the indigenous people here in the Americas had been engaging in tribal wars for at least 1,000 years before the arrival of those pilgrims. As a matter of fact, the archaeological evidence confirms the predominant role of warfare amongst indigenous societies here in America long before the arrival of the European settlers. The evidence of this includes burned structures, defensive site locations, and signs of trauma in skeletal remains like crushed skulls and severed limbs. The belief that the Native Americans were, peaceful savages who were free from the conflict of war until the arrival of the white man. This is nothing more than historical revision, which is popularized by Hollywood hypocrites and progressive pundits. As a matter of fact, the research actually reveals that the most violent era of American history actually occurred before the arrival of the Europeans. The proof of this point was presented in the Journal of American Antiquity, where a Washington State University archaeologist named Tim Kohler, he documented how nearly 90% of human remains from the pre-Columbian period had trauma from blows to either their heads or parts of their arms. Not only that, but there's also evidence that many indigenous tribes here in America were engaging in scalping and torture and cannibalism long before the arrival of the Pilgrims there at Plymouth Rock. Now, in light of these facts, I guess we could call Thanksgiving Indigenous Survivors Day. but listen, the reason I say this is because, there were people who were surviving the battles amongst the indigenous peoples long before the Pilgrims arrived. And if the truth be told, the Wampanoag people, who were there when the Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth Rock, they were survivors. They had survived the violence that plagued this nation long before the arrival of the Puritan Pilgrims. And while it's true that there were many Europeans who came to conquer the land, it's also true that this land was already stained with Native American blood from all of the tribal wars that had already been waged long before the arrival of the white man. Now, as we consider this gruesome history of America, we can also rejoice as we commemorate the peaceful relationships which were formed as both the Wampanoag people and the Pilgrims learned to rely on one another. That's right. The Wampanoag people were quick to make peace with the Pilgrims because their population had been drastically diminished by plague and by warfare, and therefore they were probably hoping for help from the Pilgrims so that they could defend this territory against the other warring nations. At the same time, the Pilgrims were happy to establish a peace treaty because they desperately needed the help of the natives in order to survive that first winter. And not only that, but listen, it was their initial desire to bring the good news of Jesus Christ to the indigenous people here in America. The proof of my point can be found in the Mayflower Compact, which was signed by those who arrived there at Plymouth Rock. And here's how they put it. It's in the beginning of this document where they wrote, and I quote, "Having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia." That's right. The Puritan Pilgrims didn't come to commit genocide. They didn't come to conquer land. No, instead, they came to glorify God as they spread the good news of the Christian faith. And while it's true that this missionary endeavor ended up being tarnished by the conquest of King Philip, it's also true that the Lord still used the Pilgrims to bring the gospel message to America so that indigenous peoples could learn about the Lord Jesus Christ. I personally love Thanksgiving, and one reason why is because I have Native American ancestors on my father's side of the family, and as a Christian now, I'm thankful that the Lord sent missionaries to North America so that many might be saved. And as we prepare to celebrate Thanksgiving this Thursday, I encourage you to remember the words of the psalmist. It's in the 100th Psalm where the psalmist declares, "Enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. Be thankful to him and bless his name." With a heart filled with gratitude, I'm thankful. I'm thankful to the Lord for all of his wonderful gifts. And I'm thankful for the Pilgrims that God used to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ here to America. And in light of their example, I think that we ought to look for every opportunity to spread this good news so that sinners of every stripe, whether civilized or savage, can be saved by faith in Jesus Christ. With this as our message, let's continue to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.